The rain came down in relentless sheets, turning the narrow London streets into rivers of mud and filth. Beneath the flickering glow of a gas lamp, a young woman pressed herself against the cold stone of a bakery wall. Her name was Elara Finch, and to the world she was nothing more than a workhouse orphan, a girl of no consequence, no family, and no future. She clutched a parcel of day-old bread to her chest, a small victory against the gnawing hunger that had been her constant companion. Her hands, though chapped and raw from labor, moved with a quiet dignity as she tucked a stray strand of dark hair behind her ear. Her eyes, the color of a storm-tossed sea, held a depth of resilience that her ragged appearance could not diminish. She had learned long ago to expect nothing from the world and to rely only on the strength of her own will. Tonight, however, the world seemed more hostile than usual. The rain had soaked through her thin shawl, and the wind bit with an early winter's chill. She knew she should return to the cramped, drafty room she shared with 3 other girls from the mill, but a strange restlessness kept her rooted to the spot. The grand houses of the wealthy loomed nearby, their windows glowing like warm, unreachable jewels. It was a different world, one separated from her by an unbridgeable chasm of birth and circumstance. A distant rumble of carriage wheels broke her reverie. Elara shrank deeper into the shadows, instinctively making herself small. A magnificent black-lacquered carriage, drawn by 4 pristine horses, rolled to a stop before the grandest house on the square. A footman leaped down, unfurling an umbrella as the carriage door opened. A man emerged. He was tall, with shoulders broad beneath a greatcoat of impeccable cut. The light from the house caught his face, revealing sharp, aristocratic features and dark hair touched with rain. He moved with an air of command that required no announcement. This was Alexander Blackwood, the Duke of Ashworth, a man whose name was spoken in whispers throughout London, a name synonymous with power, wealth, and an icy, impenetrable reserve. As he moved toward the steps, something caused him to pause. It was a sensation, a prickle of awareness that drew his gaze from the path before him. He turned his head, his dark eyes scanning the rain-slicked street. His focus landed on the shadows by the bakery. Elara held her breath. Their eyes met. She expected him to look away, to dismiss her as a piece of the city's unfortunate backdrop. Instead, his gaze sharpened. There was no pity in it, but an intensity that made her heart lurch. It was as if he could see past the grime and the rags, and for a fleeting moment she felt utterly exposed. Then, just as quickly, the moment broke. A footman spoke, and the Duke turned and disappeared into the house. Elara let out a shaky breath. She was a fool. A duke and an orphan had no business sharing even a glance. But as she hurried away through the rain, she felt the ghost of his stare lingering on her skin, and she could not shake the feeling that the world had just, imperceptibly, shifted. She did not notice that the force of her hurried movement had caused the thin chain she always wore around her neck to slip. The locket, her only possession of value, small and gold and engraved with a strange symbol, clattered to the cobblestones, lost in the mire of the gutter. Her past, her only connection to a family she never knew, vanished into the filthy water as she ran into the night. Hours later, as Alexander Blackwood stood by his library window, a footman entered. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. One of the stable boys found this in the street. It appears to be of some quality. We thought it best to bring it to you." The Duke turned. In the servant's outstretched hand lay a small, mudded object. He took it, his fingers wiping away the grime. It was a gold locket. He turned it over, his eyes fixing on the engraved symbol on its face. It was a mark he knew well, a royal cipher of a forgotten and deposed European house. It was the symbol of a lineage that had been violently erased from the annals of history, a lineage that was supposed to be extinct. His expression, carved from stone, remained unchanged, but inside a cold, thrilling certainty took root. The girl he had seen in the shadows, the girl with the storm-colored eyes, she was no orphan. She was the last living heir to a throne, and the locket now in his hand was the key to it all. Alexander Blackwood did not sleep. He sat in the high-backed leather chair of his study, the locket resting on the polished mahogany desk before him, illuminated by the single flame of a candle. The gold glinted, mocking the stillness of the room. He had spent years in service to the crown, navigating the treacherous waters of international intrigue, and he knew the history of this symbol intimately. The House of Veridia, a small but strategically vital kingdom nestled in the mountains of Central Europe, had fallen to a brutal coup some 20 years prior. The royal family had been slaughtered, their palace burned. The world believed the bloodline was extinguished. Yet here in a London gutter was the proof that a child had survived. His mind raced with the political implications. If the heir was alive, it could destabilize alliances. It could ignite a war. It could be a tool for powerful enemies. But more immediately, it placed the girl in grave danger. Whoever wore this locket was a target. His first thought was of the girl's face. He remembered the proud set of her chin, the spark of defiance in her eyes even as she huddled in the rain. She was a survivor. He had seen the look of a person hardened by a brutal life, and he had seen the quiet dignity she wore like armor. She would not trust easily. The morning came, cold and gray. Ilara woke on her thin pallet, the other mill girls already stirring. Her first conscious thought was the locket. Her hand flew to her neck. The chain was gone. A jolt of pure panic seized her. She tore at the blanket, her hands scrabbling uselessly in the meager light. It was not there. It was gone. A wave of nausea washed over her. It was the only thing she had, the only link to the mother and father she had never known. The matron at the orphanage had told her it was found on her as a babe, a piece of a life she was denied. Now it was lost forever. The day was a blur of misery. The mill was a hell of noise and fiber and exhaustion. Every creak of the machinery seemed to mock her loss. In the evening, as she trudged back to her lodgings, a low voice came from the alley beside the building. "Miss Finch." She whirled around, her heart hammering. A man emerged, not a ruffian but a servant in a plain, dark livery. His face was unremarkable, his bearing respectful. "My master wishes to speak with you. It is a matter of some importance." Fear and a flicker of desperate curiosity warred within her. "Who is your master?" she asked, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "His Grace, the Duke of Ashworth. He awaits you in his carriage on the main road." A duke, the man from the previous night, the one who had looked at her as if he could see her soul. What could he possibly want with her? It had to be about the locket. Perhaps he had found it. He was rich and powerful. Perhaps it was a simple act of charity. But something in the servant's tone, a seriousness, warned her this was no act of simple kindness. Against every instinct for self-preservation, Ilara nodded. She followed the servant to the corner where the same black carriage stood. The door was opened, revealing the plush, dim interior. The Duke sat inside, his face a mask of cool composure. "Please come in. I will not harm you." She hesitated for a heartbeat, then climbed inside, settling on the seat opposite him. The door closed, sealing them in a silence thick with tension. The carriage lurched forward, the city sounds becoming a muffled roar. "You found it," she said, her voice a whisper. "My locket." The Duke's gaze was on her, unwavering. "I found more than a locket, Miss Finch, or should I say, Your Highness." Ilara stared at him, her mind refusing to process the words. I am no highness. I am a mill worker, an orphan." He leaned forward, his dark eyes intense. "You are neither. You are the last survivor of the House of Veridia, the royal house of a kingdom that was murdered from the world's memory. The locket you wear is the royal seal, and the men who killed your family are still hunting for you. They know you exist, and now they know where to find you. Your life is in danger." Ilara's world tilted on its axis. The constant, nagging feeling of being different, of not belonging. The dreams of a great house on fire, of a woman's screams. It all coalesced into a horrifying, impossible truth. The Duke's words were not a lie. They were a key, unlocking a door she never knew existed. And behind that door, there was not just the promise of a lost identity, but a clear and present threat. The life she knew, as bleak as it was over. The carriage stopped, not in the slums but before the imposing front of Ashworth House. The Duke stepped down and then turned, offering his hand. "Your enemies are mine now, Your Highness. You will be safe here, I give you my word." As Alara placed her trembling hand in his, she was no longer a mill girl named Alara Finch. She was someone she didn't recognize, someone who was now a prisoner of safety, and a pawn in a game she didn't know was being played. The Duke's grip was firm, his promise a shield, but even as she accepted his protection, she wondered what the cost would be, and whether trusting this cold, commanding man was the wisest or most dangerous choice she could make. The world inside Ashworth House was as foreign to Alara as the moon. The entry hall alone was vast enough to swallow her entire building, its vaulted ceilings adorned with murals of forgotten battles and serene landscapes. Servants moved with silent efficiency, their faces blank, their gazes never lingering. She was acutely aware of her worn dress, her rough hands, and the smell of the mill that seemed to cling to her skin. The Duke led her through a labyrinth of corridors, his pace steady, his voice a low, measured guide. "You will be given rooms and a wardrobe befitting your station. A lady's maid will be assigned to you. In the morning, we will discuss the full extent of your situation." "My station," she repeated, the word tasting strange in her mouth. "Your Grace, I know nothing of being a lady. I can read and write a little, but I know no etiquette, no history, none of it." He stopped before a large oak door and turned to face her. "You will learn. Necessity is a powerful teacher, and I believe you are a remarkably quick study." His gaze swept over her, not unkindly, but with the detached assessment of a man formulating a plan. The woman who survived the streets of London has the strength to survive a drawing room. He opened the door to a bright, elegant chamber. A fire crackled in the marble hearth, casting a warm glow over silk-draped walls and a four-poster bed. A young maid curtsied deeply. "This is Mary. She will attend to you. If you require anything, you have only to ask." With that, the Duke gave a slight bow and was gone. The next few days were a disorienting blur of transformation. Mary, a kind-eyed girl from the countryside, helped Alara bathe with lavender-scented soap, washed the grime from her hair and dressed her in a simple but exquisitely soft gown. Looking at her reflection, Alara felt like an imposter. The gaunt, haunted face of the mill worker was still there, but the fine cloth and the soft light of the room cast a veneer of gentility over it. It was a mask, and she was not yet sure who wore it. The Duke summoned her to the library each morning. It was a magnificent room, 2 stories tall, filled with the scent of leather and old paper. Here he became her tutor. He was not a gentle teacher. He was demanding, precise, and his patience, while seemingly limitless, was often laced with a coolness that could feel like disdain. He taught her the history of Veridia, a tale of a prosperous, independent kingdom led by a wise king and a beloved queen, a court of culture and learning that was ruthlessly destroyed. He showed her maps, genealogies, and portraits of her ancestors. "Your father, King Aurelius, was a man of principle. His mistake was trusting his brother, a man whose ambition knew no bounds." "The man who killed them?" Alara asked, her voice tight. The Duke's jaw tightened. "Your uncle, Victor. He betrayed his king, his own blood, and sold his soul to a foreign power to seize the throne. He rules Veridia as a puppet, a tyrant who has ground your people into submission." He handed her a small, exquisitely painted miniature of a woman with kind eyes and dark hair. "Your mother, Queen Alara. You are her namesake." Alara traced the delicate features of her mother's face. It was like looking into a warped mirror. The same color eyes, the same shape of the mouth. A sob welled up in her chest, but she forced it down. She would not cry, not here, not in front of him. He seemed to sense her struggle. "It is not a weakness to grieve," he said, his voice quieter. "It is a price paid for loving." She looked up at him, surprised by the softness in his tone. For the first time, she saw not just the powerful Duke, but a man who understood loss. "You speak as one who knows," she whispered. His expression shuddered, the mask returning. "We all have our ghosts, Your Highness. Some of us simply choose to face them in silence." He moved to the window, his back to her. "The reason I know so much is that my own family was tied to Viridia through diplomatic channels. My father considered King Aurelius a close friend. Their deaths were a wound I have never been able to close." The confession hung in the air, a thread of shared sorrow connecting them. It was the first crack in his impenetrable armor, and it drew her in. He was not merely performing a duty, he was avenging a personal connection. He was fighting his own war. It made her want to fight beside him. But as the days turned into a week, she also felt the ever-tightening constraints of her new life. She was a prisoner in a gilded cage. She was safe, yes, but she was also trapped. The lessons were relentless, and the expectation to become a princess was a weight she felt crushing her. One evening, after a particularly grueling session on the nuances of courtly address, she found herself alone in the library, her frustration boiling over. She could not do this. She was not a princess. She was just Alara, and she was terrified. The door opened and the Duke entered, his brow furrowed. "I heard a sound. Is everything well?" She turned to face him, her eyes blazing with unshed tears. "No, everything is not well. I am grateful for your protection, Your Grace, but I am drowning. Every day you give me a new piece of my identity, and with every piece I feel less like myself. I do not know this woman you want me to become." She took a ragged breath. "Who am I to you? Am I a person, or am I simply a cause? A weapon to be sharpened for a war I did not choose?" The Duke stood rigid, his face unreadable. The question hung between them, sharp and dangerous. For a long moment he simply stared at her, and she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, not coldness, but a deep, warring conflict. He took a step toward her, closing the distance, and when he spoke, his voice was a low, intimate rasp that sent a shiver through her. "You are not a weapon to me, Alara." The use of her name, her true name, was like a caress. "You are the one thing I did not expect. You are the reason I am beginning to doubt the very plan I set in motion." He raised a hand, and for a heart-stopping moment she thought he would touch her cheek. But he stopped short, his fingers curling into a fist at his side. "And that doubt, more than any enemy, is what I fear the most." He turned and walked out, leaving her alone with the echo of his words and the deafening sound of her own racing heart. He was right to fear it. She was afraid, too, because in that moment she knew her struggle was no longer just for her life. It was for the battle now raging in the space between them. The days that followed were charged with a new, unspoken awareness. The Duke's lessons continued, but the air was no longer simply academic. He was more patient, his words less clipped. He would often find reasons to be in the same room as her, reading by the fire while she practiced her penmanship, offering a quiet word of correction or encouragement. Alara felt his presence like a physical force, a constant hum beneath her skin. She learned of the danger outside the estate's walls. His network of informants had delivered disturbing news. Agents of her uncle were already in London, searching for a woman matching the vague description of the lost heir. The Duke had stationed additional guards and made it clear she was not to leave the house without an escort. The threat was no longer an abstract political notion. It was a shadow with teeth, lurking just beyond the gates. One morning, a summons from the Duke came with a difference. Mary helped her into a more formal gown of deep sapphire blue, the color making her eyes burn with intensity. She found the Duke in his study, not alone. An older man with a distinguished bearing and a young woman with blonde hair and a sharp, assessing gaze stood by the fireplace. "Your Highness," the Duke said, his tone formal, "may I present Lord Henry Beaumont, a trusted confidant in matters of state, and his daughter, Lady Cecilia Beaumont." Lord Beaumont bowed. "It is an honor, Your Highness. Alexander has told me of your remarkable story." Alara inclined her head, remembering her lessons. "The honor is mine, my lord." Lady Cecilia's smile was flawless, but her eyes were cold, calculating. "Indeed, we were so eager to meet the woman at the center of such intrigue. You are quite the talk of the household." Her gaze swept over Alara's dress, her hair, her posture, cataloging every detail. "Alexander has been most secretive." The Duke's jaw tightened. "Cecilia, Lord Beaumont, let us discuss the matter at hand." He unrolled a map on the desk. "Victor's men are closing in. We must accelerate Alara's preparation. She must be ready to face the court to stake her claim before they can silence her." Alara listened as they strategized, outlining a plan for a grand ball. The event would serve as her formal reintroduction to society. It was a terrifying prospect, but she understood the necessity. She could not hide forever. She had to be seen to make her claim public so that the world would know she existed. After the Beaumonts had left, Lady Cecilia's parting words lingered in the air like a bad scent. "Do try to remember the etiquette, Your Highness. A single misstep in society can be more fatal than any assassin's blade." The Duke seemed on edge. "Pay her no mind," he said. "She has her own ambitions." Alara watched him. "And those ambitions, do they involve you?" He met her eyes, a flicker of surprise there. "They involve a title, mine specifically. Her father and my family have long desired a union between our houses." The words were a cold splash of reality. Of course, a powerful duke would be expected to marry, and a woman like Lady Cecilia, with her beauty, her breeding, and her sharp intelligence, was the obvious choice. A bitter taste filled Alara's mouth. "I see." He moved toward her, his expression intense. I have no intention of marrying Cecilia. My past is my own, and I have no desire to see it bound to her." He paused, his voice dropping. "My loyalty at this moment is to one person alone." His meaning was clear. It hung between them, a confession and a promise. Alara's breath hitched. She felt a surge of hope, but it was quickly tempered by the reality of their positions. She was a princess in name, but without an army. He was a duke bound by duty and honor. A future with him was as impossible as returning to her old life. That night she could not sleep. The weight of the impending ball, the threat of her uncle, and the agonizing pull she felt toward the Duke were a storm inside her. A noise in the corridor, the softest creak of a floorboard, brought her to full alert. She slipped from her bed and peered out her door. The hallway was empty, but a faint glow came from the direction of the Duke's private study. Her heart hammered. It was late. Perhaps he was still working. The urge to see him, to find comfort in his presence, was overwhelming. She crept down the hall, her bare feet silent on the thick carpet. The door to the study was ajar. She could hear the rustle of papers. Taking a breath, she pushed the door open. The sight that greeted her stopped her cold. The Duke was there, but he was not alone. He was locked in a quiet, intense conversation with a man Alara did not recognize, a rough-looking man with a scar across his cheek. And on the desk between them was not a map of Viridia, but a single sheet of paper bearing a familiar, terrible symbol. It was the crest of the man who wanted her dead, her uncle Victor. Her heart turned to ice. The Duke was not speaking to an ally. He was speaking to an agent of the enemy. The Duke's head snapped up, his eyes widening as he saw her in the doorway. The scarred man whirled around, his hand flying to his coat. The moment stretched into an eternity of shock and betrayal. The man she had trusted, the man she was beginning to love, was a traitor. The ground seemed to disappear beneath her feet. "What is the meaning of this?" The words were a hollow whisper, torn from a throat tight with horror. The Duke's face was pale, his usual composure shattered. "Alara, it is not what it seems. You must trust me." The scarred man drew a pistol, but it was not pointed at Alara. It was pointed directly at the Duke. A cruel smile spread across his face. "Your Grace," the man snarled, "it appears the game is finally over." One frozen instant, Alara's mind refused to function. The image of the pistol pointed at the Duke, the mocking smile on the scarred man's face. It was a scene from a nightmare. The betrayal she had felt a second ago was eclipsed by a wave of primal fear. It was not the Duke who was the traitor. It was the man in the study, and he had been using the Duke all along. The Duke's expression hardened into a mask of lethal resolve. He did not flinch. "Your plan has failed, Brant. The game, as you call it, has only just begun." Brant laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Oh, I think not. You see, your little operation to resurrect a dead princess ends tonight. Our king was most displeased to learn of her existence. He sends his regards through me." His finger tightened on the trigger. Time seemed to slow. Elara saw the Duke's muscles tense, ready to spring. She saw the cold, practiced calm in his eyes. He was a soldier as much as a nobleman, and he was calculating his odds. Brant was too far away, and the pistol was already drawn. There was no time to disarm him. But there was something he had not accounted for: Elara. The fear for her own life vanished, replaced by a desperate, instinctive need to protect him. She did not think. She acted. The heavy iron poker from the fireplace was in her hand. With a strength born of terror and years of physical labor, she swung it in a wide, powerful arc. The iron bar connected with Brant's wrist just as the pistol fired. The deafening crack of the shot was followed by a howl of pain. The ball went wide, smashing into the bookshelf behind the Duke. Brant stumbled, clutching his broken wrist, the pistol clattering to the floor. The Duke was on him in an instant, a whirlwind of controlled violence. He grabbed Brant by the collar and slammed him against the desk. The scarred man thrashed, but the Duke's grip was iron. "Who else knows about the girl?" the Duke demanded, his voice a cold, terrifying calm. "How many men are in London?" Brant spat, a glob of blood landing on the Duke's face. "You are a dead man, Blackwood, you and the little whore both. The king's reach is long. You cannot hide her forever." The Duke's fist crashed into Brant's jaw, silencing him. He dragged the man to his feet and shoved him toward the door, where two of his own guards, alerted by the gunshot, were now arriving. "Take him to the cellars. I will deal with him myself." The guards obeyed, dragging the struggling, cursing man away. The room fell silent, save for the ragged sound of Elara's breathing. She was trembling uncontrollably, the poker still clutched in her white-knuckled fist. The Duke turned to her, his eyes sweeping over her as if checking for wounds. He crossed the room in 2 strides and gently pried the poker from her grasp. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, urgent. She shook her head, unable to speak. The reality of what she had just done crashed over her. She had nearly killed a man. She had saved the Duke's life. His hands came up to cup her face, his thumbs brushing away tears she did not realize were falling. "It is over. You are safe." He tilted her chin up, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You are the bravest woman I have ever known, Elara." The sound of her name on his lips broke the dam. A sob wrenched from her chest, and she crumpled against him, her tears soaking into the fine fabric of his shirt. He wrapped his arms around her, holding her tightly, his cheek resting against her hair. In that moment, he was not a duke. He was just a man, offering comfort, offering shelter, offering himself. For a long while she just wept, letting out the fear and the horror. When the tears finally subsided, she pulled back, looking up at him. "I thought you had betrayed me," she whispered. "I saw the letter, the crest, and I thought." His face was grave. "I know. I am sorry you had to see that. I was meeting with Brant because he was a double agent I had been manipulating for months. I was feeding him false information to keep Victor's forces off our trail. It was a dangerous game, and it nearly cost you your life. I will never forgive myself for that." The confession was a balm to her wounded soul. "You were trying to protect me." "I was trying to buy us time. Time to prepare you for the ball, time to solidify our allies. But I was a fool to keep it from you. You had a right to know." His thumb traced the line of her jaw, sending a shiver through her. "Promising you my protection is meaningless if I do not also promise you my trust. I was wrong." The vulnerability in his admission was more powerful than any declaration of love. This proud, powerful man was exposing his flaws to her. It was a gift of immense value. He led her to a nearby sofa, sitting beside her, still holding her hand. "There is more you need to know. Victor has sent his best assassin, a woman known only as the Viper. The man you clubbed was her underling. She will not be as easy to stop. The ball is in 3 days. We must be ready for her." Alara listened, her mind racing. The enemy was no longer a faceless threat. It was a woman, a killer with a reputation. What do we do? The Duke's grip on her hand tightened. "We draw her out. We use the ball as bait. You will be at the center of it, shining like a beacon, while my men and I work the shadows to catch her." He looked at her, his dark eyes blazing with an intensity that stole her breath. "I will not let anything happen to you. I swear it on my life." His promise echoed in the quiet room, a vow of steel and passion. Alara knew the danger was far from over, but as she looked into his eyes, she felt a strength she had never known she possessed. She was no longer a helpless orphan. She was a woman fighting for her life, for a future, and for the man she loved with a depth that terrified her. The Viper was coming, but she would not be found cowering in the shadows. She would meet her fate head-on with the Duke at her side. The night of the ball arrived with the crisp promise of autumn. Ashworth House was transformed into a glittering palace of light and music. Hundreds of candles blazed in crystal chandeliers, their flames reflected in the polished marble floors. Garlands of white roses and ivy wound around marble columns, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and beeswax. Alara stood before the mirror in her chambers, barely recognizing the woman who stared back. Her dark hair was piled high in an elegant arrangement, threaded with pearls that glowed like captured moons. Her gown was a masterpiece of deep emerald silk, a color that made her storm-gray eyes look like jewels. Her skin, no longer gaunt but flushed with health, seemed to radiate a quiet power. The Duke had given her more than a new identity. He had given her a new soul. Mary handed her the locket, now cleaned and polished to a brilliant shine. "His Grace asked me to ensure you wear this, Your Highness. He said it is time the world knew who you truly are." Alara fastened the chain around her neck, the small gold locket resting against her heart. It was her history, her proof, her burden. A knock came at the door and the Duke entered. He was resplendent in black evening wear, his presence filling the room, but his eyes were only for her. He stopped a few paces away, his expression one of raw, undisguised admiration. "You are beautiful," he said, the words simple but laden with emotion. "A queen in every sense of the word." Warmth flooded her cheeks. "I am terrified," she admitted. He closed the distance between them, taking her hand. "Fear is not a weakness, it is the price of courage." His thumb stroked the back of her hand. "Remember who you are. You are Alara of Viridia, you are a survivor, and you are not alone." His gaze held hers, a silent promise of protection, of partnership. They descended the grand staircase together, a hush falling over the assembled guests. The cream of London society was present, their eyes wide with curiosity. The rumors had been spreading for weeks, and now the source of them stood before them in stunning reality. Lady Cecilia was among the crowd, her smile brittle, her eyes sharp with envy. For Alara, the next hours were a blur of curtsies, introductions, and practiced conversation. She moved through the crowd with a grace that surprised even herself, the Duke a constant, reassuring presence at her side. He introduced her as the Princess Alara of Viridia, and the title, once an impossible dream, now felt like a suit of armor. Men bowed, women curtsied. She was seen. But she was also a target. The Duke's men were everywhere, dressed as footmen and guests, their eyes scanning the crowd. Alara felt the invisible net of protection around her, but she also felt the weight of the unseen threat. The Viper was here. She could feel it, a cold prickle on the back of her neck. The moment came during the first waltz. The Duke had led her onto the floor, their bodies moving in perfect harmony. It was a dance of intimacy and elegance, and for a few precious moments the world fell away. There was only the music, the warmth of his hand on her waist, and the unspoken language of their eyes. As the dance ended, a servant approached with a glass of champagne. The Duke took it, handing it to Alara. She was about to sip when a flash of intuition made her pause. The servant's eyes. They were cold, flat, and lingered a fraction too long on the locket at her throat. "Your Highness," the Duke said, his voice low, following her gaze. "Stay behind me." Happened in a heartbeat. The servant's hand darted into his coat, emerging with a small, glinting knife. A scream went up from the crowd, but before the servant could move, the Duke was already in motion. He shoved Alara behind him and lunged, his hand catching the assailant's wrist. The two men grappled, a whirl of violence in the middle of the ballroom. The disguised guards converged, pinning the man to the floor. But Alara knew with a sickening certainty that this was not the Viper. It was a diversion. The panic in the ballroom was instantaneous. Guests scattered, their cries echoing off the marble. Alara was jostled, separated from the Duke. She stumbled, catching her balance against a pillar. Her heart hammered. She scanned the chaos, searching for him. A hand closed around her arm, sharp and unyielding. It was not the Duke. Alara was yanked back, a cold, feminine voice whispering in her ear. "Hello, little princess. The ball is over." She was dragged through a side door into a dimly lit corridor, the sounds of the ball fading behind her. Her captor was a woman, tall and lithe, with hair the color of pale wheat and eyes as cold and green as glacier ice. It was the Viper. She wore a servant's dress, but the woman beneath was all predator. "Your uncle sends his love," the Viper purred, her grip like a vice. "He wants the locket, and he wants you to watch as I carve it from your neck." Alara's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to stay calm. She remembered the Duke's lessons, his words. Fear is not a weakness. It is the price of courage. She would not go quietly. "You will not have it," Alara said, her voice surprisingly steady. "And you will not have me." The Viper laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Such spirit, it will make the kill all the sweeter." She produced a dagger from the folds of her dress, its blade gleaming in the faint light. But in that moment, a shadow filled the doorway. The Viper turned, and there stood the Duke, his face a thundercloud of rage. In his hand was a sword, drawn from the display in the hall. "Release her," he said, his voice a low, terrifying growl, "and I will make your death quick." The Viper smiled, a chilling thing. A fight then? How chivalrous. She pushed Alara aside, sending her crashing to the floor. The Duke advanced, and the Viper met him, her dagger a blur of motion against his longer blade. Alara watched in horror as the two figures clashed in the narrow corridor. The Duke fought with a controlled fury, his skill evident, but the Viper was fast, her movements vicious and unpredictable. She landed a shallow cut on his arm, drawing blood, but he pressed his advantage, his sword forcing her back. Seeing her opportunity, the Viper feinted and then lunged, not at the Duke, but at Alara. Alara's hand flew to her locket, clutching it protectively. The Duke roared, twisting his body to intercept. He was too late. Alara saw the dagger flash toward her. She threw herself sideways, a scream tearing from her throat. The blade caught her shoulder, ripping through the silk of her gown and into her flesh. Pain exploded through her, white-hot and blinding, but she did not let go of the locket. The Viper lunged again, but this time the Duke was there. He brought his sword down in a devastating arc, disarming the assassin. In one brutal, final motion, he drove his shoulder into her, slamming her against the stone wall. There was a sickening crack, and the Viper crumpled to the floor, unconscious. The Duke dropped his sword and was at Alara's side in an instant, his face pale with panic. "Alara, look at me." Her vision was swimming, but she forced her eyes to focus on him. His hands were pressing against her wound, trying to stem the flow of blood. It is not deep," she whispered, though the pain was immense. "Do not speak," he commanded, his voice shaking. "Just hold on." He scooped her into his arms, cradling her against his chest. The sounds of the ball, the chaos, the danger, it all faded into the background. There was only the urgent, powerful beat of his heart against her ear, and the terrifying realization that she was slipping away. As he carried her through the shattered ballroom, past the horrified faces of the guests, He shouted for a physician, his voice raw with desperation. Alara looked up at him, her hand coming up to touch his face. "You saved me," she breathed. He looked down at her, his dark eyes wet with unshed tears. "I will always save you," he vowed, "even if it costs me everything." The world dissolved into darkness. Alara drifted through a haze of pain and fragmented dreams. She saw her mother's face, soft and smiling, then a castle consumed by fire. She felt the cold fear of the streets, the warmth of the Duke's hand in hers, and the searing pain of the dagger. Through it all, there was a voice, low and steady, urging her to hold on. A hand cool on her fevered brow. A presence constant and unwavering. When she finally opened her eyes, the light of a new day was slanting through the windows of her chamber. She was in her own bed, the covers drawn up to her chin. Her shoulder was bandaged, the pain now a dull, persistent ache. The room was quiet, save for the soft crackle of the fire. And there, slumped in a chair beside her bed, was the Duke. His cravat was loosened, his hair disheveled, and dark shadows lay beneath his eyes. He was asleep, but even in rest, his brow was furrowed with worry. He had stayed. He had kept his promise. She stirred, and the sound, however small, woke him instantly. His eyes flew open, locking onto hers with a mixture of relief and lingering fear. "Alara," he breathed, leaning forward. "Thank God." "How long?" she whispered, her throat raw. "2 days," he said. "The physician said the wound was clean, but you lost a lot of blood. You were delirious with fever." His voice cracked. "I thought I feared." She reached out, her hand finding his. "I am here." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. The gesture was so tender, so uncharacteristically vulnerable, that it brought tears to her eyes. "I cannot lose you," he said, his voice rough. "I cannot, not after everything." The wall he had so carefully constructed around his heart crumbled before her eyes. "Alexander," she said, his name a soft prayer on her lips. He looked up, his dark eyes shining. "I was a man bound by duty. I took you in for a cause, for a promise to the dead. But somewhere between the history lessons and the quiet evenings by the fire, the cause became a person. You became everything." He held her hand tighter, his gaze searing into hers. "I love you, Alara, not as a princess, not as an heir, but as the woman who stormed into my life and showed me what it meant to feel again." The words washed over her, healing a wound far deeper than the one on her shoulder. "I love you too," she confessed, her voice trembling. "I have loved you since the moment you looked at me in the rain and saw not an orphan but a person. You gave me my history, but you also gave me a future, a reason to hope." He rose from the chair and sat on the edge of the bed, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "Your fight is not over, Alara. The Viper is dead and her network is crippled, but Victor still sits on your throne. We will need to face him." "I know," she said, "but I am not afraid, not with you by my side." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. "We will reclaim your kingdom, my love. I will not rest until you are crowned Queen of Viridia and your people are freed from tyranny. This is my vow." He closed the small distance between them, his lips meeting hers in a kiss that was soft, reverent, and full of the promise of all the years to come. It was a kiss that sealed a bond forged in danger, tempered by trust, and ignited by a passion that would burn for a lifetime. The next weeks were a whirlwind. The scandal of the ball, the attempted assassination, and the revelation of the lost princess were the talk of London. But Alara and Alexander moved through it all with a quiet, unshakable unity. The locket, once a symbol of her lost past, was now a symbol of her reclaimed identity. She wore it openly, a declaration to the world. On a crisp morning in late autumn, they stood on the steps of Ashworth House, watching a delegation from Viridia arrive. It was a group of loyalists, men and women who had spent 2 decades waiting for the return of their rightful ruler. They had come to pledge their allegiance, to beg their princess to lead them home. Alara looked at Alexander, her heart swelling with love and gratitude. He had given her the impossible. He had given her herself. "Are you ready?" he asked, his hand finding hers. She squeezed it, a smile on her lips. I am ready for anything. Together, they turned to face the future. It was a future filled with uncertainty, with political battles and the long, hard road to reclaim a stolen kingdom. But it was also a future filled with love, with a bond that had been tested by fire and found unbreakable. They were no longer just a duke and an orphan. They were Alexander and Alara, two souls forged in the crucible of danger, bound by a love that was destined to change the course of history. The story of the lost princess was no longer a tragedy. It was a beginning. And as they stood there, facing their destiny, the future stretched out before them, a shining, unknown country, waiting to be conquered by the power of their love.